Pushing Back the Shadows, Fighting Depression Together.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Pushing Back the Shadows podcast. My name is Alex Davis. I'm the main blogger and the creator of Pushing Back the Shadows. Today's episode, I'd like to look a little bit about what to say to people who are struggling with mental health issues, whether that's depression, anxiety, bipolar, and so on. This is an ongoing series that's currently on the website at the moment, so do check that out. There you'll find more information, but in this episode I just wanted to run through some of the top tips that I have for you to support other people. So the first one that I always talk about is the importance of listening. That in itself is the most important thing that you can do when trying to support someone with mental health. The reason being is that it's their mental health issue, it's in their mind. So really they're the best ones who will know what's going on, how they're feeling, how it affects them, and what things work, what things don't work. Now admittedly a lot of that is going to be through trial and error, experiencing and experimenting with certain different aspects, and then really looking at seeing what helps them to feel better, what doesn't. But a lot of it is going to be that they know what is inside their head. If you take me, for example, I know how different things make me feel, and I know some of the techniques that work for me, but at the same time, these same techniques don't work for other people. The best example that I can give you is I was caught in a pretty dark spiral a couple of weeks back, and where I was at that point, there was only one thing that I was going to do. Now, normally, if I'm in a depressive spiral, I will put the TV on, put some music on, play a computer game, something like that, and that's normally enough to catch me, slow me down until I can get myself out of it. If those fail, then in previous months it has been known that I will turn to self-harm, because that's one thing that invariably does help get me through it. Now, on that particular spiral that I mentioned, I'd already tried putting a film on, I'd tried playing a computer game, and nothing was pulling me out of it. So somehow I managed to phone a friend. It's something that I don't normally do. I'm not very good at phoning people when I'm in a particular struggle. However, I did phone a friend this time, and they started going down the route of giving me encouragement. Now, the reason I say to listen is because for me, in a depressive spiral, giving me encouragement is one of the worst things that you can do. Telling me to look at what I've achieved will actually get me to look at the opposite. So, for example, you stayed in that room with all those people for 20 minutes. Yeah, I did, but actually I left the room and I stayed out of the room for 40 minutes. Something along those lines. And I think if that person had just taken a little bit more time to just listen to what I was saying, where I was saying, look, I need a quick fix to break me out of this, I don't need the long-term encouragement right now, it could have gone a lot better. So yeah, the people that you're talking to, they're the ones who are living with that particular condition, and they know what they're feeling. 9 times out of 10 they know what they need in that particular situation. And just going off a situation, everybody's situation is different. As I say, you know, what works for me won't necessarily work for friend A or friend B. Everybody's different. I play computer games. I've got a friend of mine who doesn't do that. It doesn't work for her. The other reason that I say to listen is because how else can you understand? Thinking back to my sixth form days, we used to, during our form time, we'd be given a problem that we would have to solve. It was one of those, have you ever done those riddles where it's, you get given, this person lives in this house, that person has that pet, this person drinks this drink, that person does this hobby, who lives in that colour house? And you've got all those clues and you have to work it out by process of elimination who lives in that particular house. So I used to do things like that, and the important part was to read the clues that you had in front of you. Otherwise, you had no hope of being able to tackle that problem, being able to unpack it and find the answer. And it's exactly the same here. You have to listen to the problem, you have to listen to what they're saying, because they will give you all the answers that you need to be able to tackle the situation. With, again, using myself as an example, encouragement works when I'm not in a spiral. Encouragement does not work when I'm in a spiral. And by a spiral, I mean where my mood is just sinking lower and lower and lower. Now, if you weren't listening to what I was saying, you wouldn't know that, so you'd probably try encouragement and possibly risk sending me the wrong way. So really, listening is one of the key things. It's always what you should start with, so you can get a good understanding of the problem and find out how to tackle it. Now, point 2 that I make, the second thing that is important to do, is to talk. Now, I know that does sound quite obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people don't talk about mental health. It's one of those stigmatized topics that everybody tries to avoid. They don't like talking about it because it's a very personal thing. However, encouraging someone to talk about it will give you all the tools that you need, because they'll be able to answer some of the questions that we would have asked while we were listening. But it also encourages them to be more open with it. It'll encourage them to talk about it, to share it, and by doing so, that will encourage them to help themselves because they're talking about it. There are a couple of details that we need to take into account when talking to people. And the first one, really, is your phrasing. What kind of words are you using? Now, a friend of mine decided that he was going to send me a message. He hadn't heard from me in a couple of days because I'd been having a rough couple of days. I hadn't really felt like messaging. And the first thing he said was, "I'm glad you messaged, I was really worried." On the surface, it sounds brilliant. You know, he was worried for me, that means he cares about me, he wished that I was in touch, and so on. However, when you're caught in depression, words such as worry can invoke feelings of guilt in the person who's suffering. And I'm fairly certain that wasn't the intention. In fact, we had that conversation, it wasn't his intention. But just be mindful of what kind of words you're using. Try and phrase things positively. So instead of, "I was really worried about you," say, "I'm really glad to hear from you." In essence, it means exactly the same thing. But one, "I was worried about you," invokes those feelings of guilt. But the other, "I'm really glad to hear from you," actually invokes feelings of acceptance, worth, encouragement. They are pleased to hear from me. I mean something to them. And that just avoids going through that guilt cycle, because obviously we don't want to invoke any guilt because that can push them further and further down. Tying it back into the first part where you listen, use encouragement in moderation. If anything, try and get them talking about general stuff. See if you can avoid having to encourage them in that way. But also, again, look at whether or not the encouragement's going to help them at that moment. Don't just go down the route of encouragement. Try and get them to talk about other aspects of it as well. So even things like, how does it make them feel? The other part with talking is that it does reinforce a good connection with that person. You're encouraging them to talk. They know already that you're going to listen to them when they need to talk, but they also know that you're going to talk to them. You're not just going to say, "Okay, spew, let's see what we can do with this problem. You talk, I'll listen." Sometimes it's they don't know what to say, so you have to fill in the gap. You have to talk to them. And that way, you're establishing that good connection because they know, well, I can talk to them. I don't always have to be talking about how I feel, what I'm doing, etc. They will talk to me as well. So really the second important part is, as I say, to talk to them. You're listening to Pushing Back the Shadows. So the next part of talking things through and what to say is looking at some of the questions that you're asking and which questions to avoid in certain times. So I guess really this is all about sensitivity. Looking at things like, are you okay? How are you? Questions like that. They are very good questions and they're quite important for starting a conversation going, but there is an element of timing that you need to be aware of. For example, my mum will ask me, am I okay? When it's a one-to-one question, just the two of us, that's fine. I will answer it. But if there's other people in the room, I won't, because it's one of those you don't want to talk about how you're feeling in front of everybody else. Effectively, it pinpoints the problem. So if she's picked up that I'm not on such a good moment, whether I've gone quiet or whether there's something in my face, whatever it is that's given her the impression that I'm not okay, asking me if I'm okay, especially in front of everybody else, it kind of pinpoints that problem. It makes me think, oh goodness, my mask isn't quite as good, somebody's noticed, I'm going to have to answer, but there's all these people around, I don't want to answer, and it kind of kicks the mind into an overload. Mostly this is, I've found it's more on the anxiety side, so whether it's a depressive spiral or an anxiety attack, asking that question does kind of trigger an anxiety moment. Not necessarily a full-on attack, but it certainly triggers a moment for me. It does have the potential of exasperating the problem. As I say, when I'm asked in front of other people, it pushes me into that kind of cycle, and it's not good. So really, ask questions like that when you're more on a one-to-one basis. Try and avoid them when you're around other people. What you can do, and this is something that my mum and I have done that we found helps, is establish some kind of code word. Now that may sound a little daft to some people, but it works. So with my mum and I, if she asks me if I'm okay, there's a word that I can use, which I won't mention here, but there's a word I can use that says to her, no I'm not, but I'm coping. So it could be something simple like, if you're sat there and somebody asks if you're okay, somebody that you know quite well, you can turn around and say, yeah, I'm alright, I'm just thinking. Okay, a little broad, but if your code word is thinking, it says, well, no, I'm not okay, but I'm coping. I will be okay. And then what that does is that avoids you having to talk about the problem. It avoids everybody else knowing about the problem, and it also answers the question. The reason I say bring in some kind of code word is because a lot of people will say, are you okay? And if you say yes, or yeah, or I'm fine, just leave it like that, people aren't always convinced, because I'm fine is that stereotypical brush off the question response, and that can lead to being asked again and again and again, which ties us straight into the next point, which is about when to leave it, avoiding the repetitions. So this is in part 4 of our series, which will be is on the website. Avoiding repetitions is another important thing. It can lead to people feeling badgered even, especially if they're in a bit of a bad moment. So repeating the question of are you okay can just keep emphasizing that problem and can exasperate it, but it depends on what it is that you're repeating. A lot of the time they already know what you're going to say. I know they're not mind readers, but a lot of the time they do. You know, when you're starting to express how you're feeling, there are those responses that people will automatically turn to. And it's not always about bringing those responses in. A lot of the time you can just say it once and leave it as said. So don't remind them, for example, that you're here for them 3 times, 4 times in an hour. Maybe remind them just the once, and it will be there, they'll have that in their mind, and they'll know what they can do, that they can turn to you if they need to. Another part with repetitions is that, especially with questions like, are you okay? It can lead them to start questioning, well, don't you believe me? Which is normally where my problem comes in. You know, when I said about the mask that's slipping, it leads to me feeling like I'm not doing such a good job at hiding it. That's normally one of the first questions that pops into my head. You know, why are you asking me again? Do you not believe me? I've told you I'm fine. Why are you asking me? And it can then spout off a load of other questions, like, as I mentioned, with the mask itself, or it can spout off things like, okay, somebody's noticed that there's a problem, this isn't good, I'm not doing a good enough job, I should be hiding it better, I should be stronger than this. A lot of different questions can come from that one thing. So realistically, you do want to avoid the repetitions. Don't keep asking them if they're okay. Don't keep reminding them that you're here if they need you. Obviously, that is a good thing to remind them of. Just use it in some kind of moderation. Don't just keep asking them or telling them. There are a couple of other examples that I've given in the post itself, so do check that out. And that leads us into also when to leave it, which I mentioned is this particular segment. Because if you keep asking them or you keep saying things, it can exasperate the problem. And especially with that "are you okay" question, they could be fine. They could actually genuinely be fine. It's happened to me before. I have been fine. I've just been quite quiet. And so they could be fine, they could be coping, or alternatively they might be self-conscious. They might not feel like they can say what's really the matter. Again, that's happened with me. When there's too many people around, I can't always say, there's a problem, I need some help. So sometimes it is just about leaving it, letting them work through it, and accepting what they say at face value. At other times, if they're giving off the right indicators, there will be times when you do need to push, particularly if there's concern for their safety, or if there's concern for somebody else's safety. You do need to push in those instances and try and get to the root of the problem. But generally, on a day-to-day basis, try and take it at face value. Try not to push too hard, because that can close them off, and that can lead to them feeling badgered, and that will just shut them down, make them withdraw. So really, moderate it. Use it in a sensible balance, a sensible mix, and you never know, the results might just surprise you.
You're listening to Pushing Back the Shadows.
Alright, so part 5 is one of the more difficult ones. It relates to mindfulness. Now, if any of you have got any experience with counselling or therapy, that sort of thing, you'll have heard this word a couple of times. Mindfulness looks at being mindful of your own emotional state and mental state in your mental health struggle. My take on it is a slightly different spin to it. It's about being mindful of somebody else's state. So it's a little bit like sensitivity, but you're looking at the other person and what kind of position they're in. So it looks a lot at whether or not they're in a position to talk about how they're feeling, but it has a couple of other details in it too. So looking at that first part, are they in a position to talk? One of the important things to think about is where they are in themselves at that point. For example, as I said earlier on in this episode, I've got a history of self-harm, and if I'm caught in a spiral where self-harm's looking like the option that I'm going to take, it's not a good time to start asking me to unpack self-harm. It might sound quite obvious, but it's one of the things that a lot of people do tend to forget. They don't always think about the position that that person's in. So really just be aware of their situation, be mindful of where they are, and just really have a look at what kind of things they're experiencing at that moment, and try and work out what kind of things you need to avoid. Admittedly, that does come with time. It's something that as your relationship with that person develops, as you get to know more about their struggle, that's something that will become easier. But really, that is quite an important part. Sometimes it is good to tackle the issue head on, which is why I say it's better when you've got a relationship with that person, better to be able to work out what to talk about. But other times, if they're in a spiral, don't ask them what makes their depression tick or what makes their anxiety tick. Don't ask them things like that. Try and support them as they're going through it. When they're on an okay note or a good note, it's okay to ask them. You can unpack that with them a little bit and explore it. Now there are times when you will need to ask some of those questions while they're in that state, just so that you can work out the best way to help them in that particular moment. But really, do try and avoid it. It's not a good idea to ask them, as I say, ask them about self-harm if they're feeling inclined to do it at that particular time. It kind of reinforces the thought in their head, and it makes them more inclined really to go down that route, at least certainly as far as my experiences have gone. Now, that links into spirals, because sometimes asking the wrong thing can stick them in a spiral. A lot of the time this is known as triggers, certain topics, words, situations that can trigger a spiral or a panic attack. It's a good idea, if they know what their triggers are, to try and get those inside your head so you know what kind of things to avoid. Again, that does come with a deeper relationship with that person, but it's a very important thing to have in mind. Another important part with being mindful of their emotional state is try and avoid things like need and should. This is one thing that I found really is a problem in my own struggle. A lot of the time I find that I know what I need to do. I really do. I know I need to get up. I know I need to go to the shop. I know I need to be doing this, that, and the other, whatever it is. I just need the encouragement, the motivation to get me to do it. Now, the way I say avoid need and should is because it can create those feelings of guilt, or it can create feelings of weakness, make you feel like you're pathetic. It can even result in some feelings like irritation or anger, because you're thinking, well, I should be able to do this, so why can't I do it? The problem with mental health, or one of the problems rather, is that a lot of the time all the knowledge is in there. You know what you need to do, but you just can't make yourself do it. With me, for example, getting out of the flat and something simple like going to the shop is a challenge. The shop is busy. I have to walk there. I have to actually get myself up, put shoes on, get myself out the door. I've got to remember to take a shopping bag. I need to do this. I need to do that. And it overwhelms it sometimes. Now, a good example that I can give for this one is when I was working at my old job. I had a day where I was struggling. I'd been sat on the edge of my bed for about 10, maybe 15 minutes, halfway through getting dressed for going out to work. And it was one of those days where I just sat there and I'm looking at my feet and I'm saying, come on, you need to move. I need to get dressed. You need to move. And it was like somebody had attached weights to my feet. I could not move my feet no matter what I tried. I don't know whether you've ever experienced that, but it makes it hard to get moving, to do something. So I phoned my dad up and just explained. I said, look, this is how I feel. I need to go to work because I need a job. I need to live. I need a job to live because I need the money to be able to support myself. And I just can't seem to make myself move. The prospect of putting my suit on, getting some breakfast, getting out the door, getting in the car, driving off to work, getting to work, that just was completely overwhelming, and I think that was the main cause of the problem. So my dad turned round and broke it down into steps. Put your shirt on, go get yourself a biscuit, or a mouthful of your cup of tea or something, then put your trousers on, get another biscuit or a mouthful of cereal or something, then find your socks, another drink of your tea, find your shoes, another mouthful of cereal, and do it that way, and almost treat breakfast and the cup of tea as a reward. You've done the bit that you feel you can't do, so have a little reward, have a break, and just broke it down like that, and it got me out the door. It got me to work. Okay, I didn't last too long at work, admittedly. My manager may have sent me home at that point, but it still got me out the door. It helped me achieve that thing that I needed to achieve. And that's, he didn't tell me that I needed to put my shirt on. He didn't tell me that I needed to have breakfast. He said, okay, try this, try that, have a go at this. And it was that coaxing through, that encouragement, and this is where the moderation comes in, looking at using that encouragement in some form of moderation, because it does depend on the encouragement itself, but that's where that came in. So instead of telling me what I had to do, he just got me to do effectively what I needed to do without telling me I needed to do it. The next bit that I want to look at is apologies, because this is one of the big things that I found people with some kind of mental health struggle will do. They will apologise a lot. I don't know whether you know anybody who does apologise quite frequently. I know I've got a couple of people that I know who apologise, and usually they would say they've got a very good reason for it. Looking at myself, if I apologise, it's because I don't see much worth in myself. I feel like I need to be apologising for things. Like if a friend takes 2 or 3 hours to talk me through a bad patch that I'm having, I will usually have apologised, because I'll be thinking, well, I'm not worth you spending 2 to 3 hours over. I feel bad for you doing that. So it's important to be understanding. A lot of the times, them apologising does help them. It makes them feel like they're contributing and acknowledging the help that you've given them. So a lot of the times, it is good to just let them apologise. There's not much that you can do to stop them, because they will try and apologise as much as they can anyway. But it's important to understand some of the reasons behind it. Now, as I say, for mine, it comes out more with self-worth. I'm sorry I'm not strong enough to do this. I'm sorry that I'm having bad moments. I'm sorry that I'm clingy, etc. But there are reasons behind it. With other people, I know there can be things like maybe they do have that friend or that partner who tells them that they aren't good enough, that they're too much hassle. Maybe somebody else has told them that in the past and just accentuated those feelings, so they might apologise more. And it's really something to be mindful of, and just reassure them that it's okay. Don't necessarily tell them that they don't have to apologise, but you can put that in from time to time if you want to. But just tell them it's okay. Tell them it's, if you've done something for them, that it's not a problem, you're happy to do it. Remind them that anytime they need help, you're there for them, that it's not an inconvenience, that sort of thing. And just be quite mindful of why they're apologising. Normally, as I say, they do have a good reason for it. It's not just apologising for the sake of things. Another example I can give you with myself is usually quite late at night, when my insomnia's kicked in good and proper. My brain can have a field day with my depression, and it can look at a lot of the things that I haven't done during the day, or even during the past couple of months, and it can really lead to a sense of worthlessness. I should have done this, I should have done that, why didn't I do this? Why should anyone bother, because I'm just a pain in the neck, really. That sort of thing. So really be mindful and let them know that it is okay. And you might find that those apologies do decrease over time. It's one of those things, it's a bit of a waiting game, and it does take time. But just reassure them. Reassurance in this instance is possibly one of the best things that you can give them. Pushing back the shadows, fighting depression together. Alright, so the last part I wanted to talk about is disappearance. It's one of the things that's quite worrying for a lot of people, because when you know somebody with depression, if they disappear, there is almost a tendency to panic because you think that they might be suicidal. Normally, if you know that they are that way inclined anyway, that does incite that sort of panic, but a lot of people do worry when somebody that they're talking to just disappears. But I did want to untap that a little bit in this podcast and just explain some of the reasons behind why people would disappear, but also some of the things that you can do just to avoid those feelings of panic. So with the disappearance itself, some people, and I know a couple of people who are like this, and I myself can be one of them, sometimes everything just gets a bit too much. You get overloaded. If you're caught in a bit of a spiral anyway, or you're having an anxiety attack, you can find that it really does get too much, and you just need to stop and remove yourself from that situation. An example of this would be a couple of weeks ago in my church. I had a bit of an anxiety attack in the middle of the service, and I just had to get up and walk out and sit in another room, effectively disappearing. Now with that, it's a little easier because people can follow me. Somebody can come out and check that I'm okay. But on the flip side, if you're supporting somebody via a text message or via Messenger, WhatsApp, all these other social media things, then it can be easier for them to just disappear and be completely gone. A bit like a magician's trick. I've done it before. I've reached a stage where it was like, no, this is too much, and I've just turned my phone off and ignored it for the next couple of hours. In hindsight, it's not the best idea, because it does cause people to worry. However, it was just, I needed a break. Now, a lot of people do assume that that's end of the road, they're depressed, therefore they must be thinking suicidal thoughts, they've disappeared, and then they panic. But as I say, with me, it was too much. I just needed to shut my phone off for a bit, and then I was fine. So it's not always about suicide, not always in that kind of sense. Sometimes it's not even about self-harm. They might not disappear purely for the reason of going to self-harm. It could just be they've got a film on, or they're playing a game, and they just need to shut everything else down for a minute. It's possible. I've done both. Yes, okay, I've also done it for the self-harm side as well, but most of the time it is just for, I need a break from everything, and I need to pretend that the rest of the world doesn't exist for a minute. So I know it's easier said than done not to worry, but do try to not worry. See if it's possible, and this doesn't always work, but see if it's possible to encourage them to say something like, I'm fine, I'm just going to do X, Y, or Z for a little bit, just a short message, or linking back to about being sensitive, whether you can establish some kind of code word they can use, so they can say that I need to disappear, but I am fine, don't worry. And then that can be a good way of avoiding anybody else worrying. So disappearance can be a viable coping mechanism, especially if, say, you've got two people talking to you, one of them's being really supportive, the other one is having a go. It's something that you might use disappearance for. So really try and be mindful. Think about what else they could have going at the same time. They might have got some bad news. They might have suddenly had something else happen. Whether it's somebody's come to the door, or whether there's a phone call come through. Something along those lines. It does not always link straight into suicide. Now, this is just going to the other side of the coin for a minute. In some of the times when I've supported friends, this is one of the things that I've struggled with. In hindsight, it's probably more my anxiety kicking in, although at that point it was undiagnosed, just suspected. But people have disappeared, and it's set me into a panic. So we did have that chat of, well, yeah, okay, you tell me why you'd feel the need to disappear, which is where listening comes in. So I listened first. Okay, now that we've listened, now you listen for a minute. You let me tell you how it makes me feel, which is where the talking came in. And I tried to use the positive phrasing as much as I could, going with concerned rather than worried, other words in a similar vein, but so that we can then use listening and talking to form that mutual understanding. And then from there we could go on to the, okay, this is how we both feel, this is the reasons behind it, how can we fix this? What can we do to fix the problem so that you can disappear when you need to, and I can think, okay, they're fine, I don't need to worry. And really that was where they started telling me more, saying, I'm fine, I just need to shut down for a minute, and not just going. It was creating that understanding and that acceptance where it was, look, you tell me you need to go, that's fine. As long as you tell me, I'm happy for you to go and take as long as you need. I just want to know that you're okay. And it was that acceptance of, yeah, I get it. You need to disappear, that's fine. So they were more inclined to nip it in the bud a little earlier and say, look, I'm going to need to disappear in a minute. So if I do go, this is why. And then you're less likely to panic. There are, of course, other measures that you can have in place. Some of these do come more recommended than others. But if, for example, you're friends with one of their relatives, if they live with somebody else, maybe have a little thing in place where you can message that person and just say, look, they've disappeared, are they okay? Just want to make sure. Now, the important thing to note with that one is don't just leave it at that. Do try and talk to that other person, maintain a relationship with that other person, because otherwise that can leave them feeling used and abused, for want of a better word, especially if you're only messaging to say, oh, they've gone, I'm concerned, what's going on? Strike up a conversation with that other person, have a chat with them from time to time, not just when person A disappears, but sometime throughout the week as well, things like that. The other, as I mentioned, is a code word that they can just say so that you know, okay, they're going to disappear in a bit, but they're okay. Things like that. But for the most part, give them space. Don't pester them. Send them a message, because if they want to, they'll reply. Ring them. If they want to, they'll answer. If they don't, fine. Just leave it. Don't give them 10, 12 missed calls. Try and avoid giving them any more than 3 missed calls at the most, because that can lead to them feeling badgered. Can also inspire those feelings of guilt as well. So just take it easy, give them that space that they need, and they will come back. That does mean that you do need to develop that relationship with them as well, because obviously if they are suicidal, you need to make sure there are certain safety measures in place, so that you can fight that tendency. But again, it comes back to the moderation. Just use it with some form of moderation, and do try not to have a go at them over it, because it is, when you're caught in that depressive spiral, a lot of the time you don't think properly. You do just think, oh, I need to get out, help me, I need to get out. And it's like there's a fog over your brain. So it's better, if you can, to be understanding, be patient, and just say, okay, I understand why you did it, and then encourage them to tell you next time before they do it. So that brings us to the end of our episode. I do hope that you found it helpful. All of this content will be on the website in more detail as well, should you ever want to refer back to it. But stay tuned, there will be another episode of the podcast coming up. And yeah, if you have any questions, then do feel free to message me. All the contact information is on the site. That's all from me. I'm Alex Davis. Take care, guys.
You've been listening to Pushing Back the Shadows. To get more involved, visit us at pushingbacktheshadows.com and hit subscribe, or join us on Facebook at facebook.com/Alex Davis PBTS, or tweet us at Alex Davis PBTS.
If you like what you've heard, help us bring you more great content by visiting pushingbacktheshadows.com/support us to give you more ways for you to get involved.